citizens of Gotham, and welcome to Circuit Court Entertainment, where we discuss how laws and history affect all forms of media. Sorry for my absence last week, Joker gas, you know how it is. But I did get to do some research on a topic that may shed some light on the current movie landscape, and with minimal law this time. That's right, I'm talking about Batman Returns. Let's get started. To get started, we also need to talk about the superhero landscape. As I talked about in my very first episode, Marvel Rides and Theme Parks, comic books were in a bit of an odd place when Tim Burton made his 1989 Batman film. The comic book bubble was peaking, but outside of it, the last few adaptations aimed at adults were rough. On Marvel's side, the Incredible Hulk TV show had ended in 1982. The premise had started to grow thin, and their repeated attempts to do a spin-off didn't manage to bear fruit. The Superman movies started off strong in 1978, but Superman 4 in 1987 is still mocked to this day. So DC decided to try again with a new director and began to work on Batman. The director they hired was a man named Tim Burton. Burton had started out at CalArts during Disney's incredible rough era in the 70s and 80s. He had made some shorts that people thought were imaginative, such as Frankenweenie, a short about a kid who resurrects his dog. But Disney was in a recuperating era. He did concept work on films such as Black Cauldron and The Fox and the Hound, but his style and the technical skill they needed were not a great mix. None of his work, outside of some distant shots, ever made it to screen. After leaving Disney, he eventually crossed paths with Paul Rubin, and was elected as the director for Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985, a movie that pulled Rubin's character, the worst comedian ever, from HBO's comedy specials and stage tours to the big screen. The movie did do well, and gave Burton the standing to make his next movie, Beetlejuice, where he crossed paths with Michael Keaton. Beetlejuice, released in 1988, was an absolute hit, making $224 million adjusted for inflation, or 1.2 times Sahara, on a much lower budget. And while Burton was not quite at blank check levels yet, the atmosphere in Beetlejuice, on top of its budget-to-sales ratio, meant WB went to him very quickly to make Batman. Batman came out in 1989 and genuinely rewrote how movies were released. This was the first critical and commercial comic book movie success since Superman 2 in 1980, with Batman making $1.04 billion adjusted for inflation, or almost 5.4 times as much as Sahara. Comic book adaptations themselves were not made very often, so to get one as successful as that really pushed comic books forward as a medium to be respected. Burton took the chance to do Edward Scissorhands, a story more personally focused and carrying themes from Frankenweenie, and that also came out to critical and commercial success. By that time, WB wanted a sequel to Batman, and after some not really discussed in public back and forth over direction, Tim Burton was told to go free and do what he wanted. The movie itself is moody, atmospheric, and the 1-2 punch of Batman and Batman Returns put Burton and Batman movies on the map. Actually, not only put Batman on the map, but it completely rewrote how Batman was seen by the general public. To tie into the movie's release, Batman the Animated Series debuted, borrowing heavily from Burton's aesthetic. It since became the standard for how Batman was seen and understood, with Kevin Conroy being the default voice of Batman pretty much until his death. And several changes made by the animated series ended up becoming canon in the comics and movies. Harley Quinn was created early on when they wanted a female Joker for a gag. While Joker ended up doing the gag in the final episode, Harley ended up as his second command and never left the series. In fact, she remained so popular, she got her own movie in early 2020. Renee Montoya, later given the identity of the DC hero The Question, debuts in Batman the Animated Series as a cop who has a more favorable opinion of Batman. And finally, the episode Heart of Ice completely rewrote Mr. Freeze's entire backstory and motivation, turning him from a guy who made ice puns and used diamonds to run his freeze ray to a tragic figure, a scientist whose employer sabotaged his efforts to freeze his ill wife until a cure is found, leaving him only able to live at sub-zero temperatures and resorting to a life of crime to save her and himself. Finally, with the Burton aesthetic, when the video game Batman Arkham Asylum came out in 2009, the tone and aesthetic were ripped from Burton's Batman, while the cast was, for at least the main characters, pulled from the animated series. So if Batman was so influential and made so much money, why did Burton only do 2 movies? Did Burton want to do something else? Sort of. His next movie, Ed Wood, came out in 1994, but that wasn't actually the problem. So, here's the thing about Batman Returns. It was marketed very, very heavily, especially at children. The TV show was out, there were toys and shirts and a McDonald's tie-in. But the movie wasn't exactly appropriate for children. Now, it was rated PG-13, but that rating was only about 8 years old at the time, having come out in 1984. The rating explanation was dark, brooding violence, which is true. But it doesn't cover stuff like Penguin biting someone's nose, or Penguin and Catwoman getting into an innuendo off, or Catwoman is killed by her boss, or Penguin is constantly leaking some sort of black ooze on top of his general appearance and acting choices. Or, look, the main issue is Penguin, and some Catwoman, but mostly Penguin. In fact, if you look at, for example, the Penguin toys from McDonald's, they pull more from the 60s TV show and the animated series, where Penguin wears a tux. So while some of this tone was back in Burton 89, it got severely amped up for the sequel. But on the other hand, well, a lot of people were not happy. Mostly parents at McDonald's. Kids who were hyped up about the toys or McDonald's or the TV show would want to see the movie, but they couldn't due to the rating. PG-13 was treated much more seriously back then. So there were a lot of lost tickets and complaints, including, again, by McDonald's. So instead of having Burton come back for a third Batman movie, Warner Brothers reached out to Joel Schumacher. Joel Schumacher had made a name for himself as a director with a good sense of talent and a good idea on aesthetics. The Lost Boys and Flatliners are especially noteworthy with their work on mood and tone. Heck, The Lost Boys is still considered a classic horror movie. So with a lot of solid hits under his belt and a good idea on tone, he was a good choice. In theory. In actuality, things were a bit different. Schumacher's aesthetics when it came to Batman were more camp. Batman Forever dipped its toe into it, though it had a more serious plotline where Bruce is struggling with if Batman is needed and if he was doing the right thing. You also had some incredibly garish makeup for Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face, and Jim Carrey's Riddler was so bedecked in question marks from his green morph suit to his cane. It still did well, but by this time the comic book bubble had burst, and DC and Marvel were trying to win readers back with serious storylines. Bane's introduction, with him breaking Batman's back after deducing who he was and where the Batcave was hidden, was around this time. Superman died, etc. Batman the Animated Series was still going on, but their Riddler showed up much more rarely, was voiced by John Glover, and wore a suit with a green suit jacket, green bowler hat, and a question mark tie, just a lot more reserved. McDonald's did get to look at the Batman Forever script, and there are bits people enjoy about it. Batman and Robin, though, not really. The last of the film series that kicked off with Batman 89, released in 1997 and saw Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, and Bane team up to take down Batman. Bane is just strong. Poison Ivy's main motivation is her eco-extremism, and Mr. Freeze, well, he ends up being both a master of ice puns and someone incredibly in love with his sick wife he froze to save her. Yep, Batman the Animated Series canon had made its way back to the movies that inspired it. The movie made $465 million adjusted, or almost 2.5 times as much as Sahara, and while it won the first week, it fell off more than half in the second week. The reviews were worse, with Rotten Tomatoes listing it at 11%. It was too camp and not matching the tone of the time. The characters were unrecognizable. It absolutely focused on toy sales. Yes, we had the bat nipples and much more obvious fetish wear. Nobody liked it, and if it wasn't for Batman the Animated Series and the surrounding DC animated universe, such as Superman the Animated Series, Justice League, Batman Beyond, and others, Batman would have faded out. After all, his first live-action movie was the '89 one, and the TV series continuity ended in 2006. In 1998, Marvel Comics released their first modern movie, Blade. This movie was incredibly R, kicking off with blood sprinklers in a nightclub and just a lot of swearing. This made $252 million adjusted, or 1.3 Saharas, that convinced execs that continuing with comic movies was worthwhile. In 2000, X-Men came out. This one was PG-13 and was, well, not that campy. The movie specifically made a joke about yellow spandex, referring to what Wolverine wore in the comics since the 70s, while putting the cast in very serious black leather, and most mutants that appeared were more human-like. X-Men did do $539 million adjusted, or 2.8 Saharas, and while it gave DC and Marvel the confidence to go forward with what tone to strike, the specter of Batman and Robin loomed over everything. X-Men continued to be more serious in its tone, even as more obviously mutated characters were introduced. Batman Begins came out in 2005, was a smash hit, making $681.7 million, or 3.5 Saharas, but it eschewed everything associated with both Burton and Schumacher, making the tone even grittier than Marvel's X-Men. Gotham looked like a normal city, the villains were never as extravagant or unique looking compared to the old movies. The closest was Joker, who wore a purple greatcoat and more typical clown makeup that we see smudge and removed. And then the MCU came along. The first Iron Man movie came out in 2008, involved the main character getting sprayed multiple times by a fire extinguisher, and the rest is history. Still, things slowly managed to acknowledge the goofiness inherent in comics. Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014 was filled with serious elements, but its emotional heart was a walking, talking tree and a talking raccoon. It made $1.02 billion, or 5.3 Saharas, aka almost as much as Batman 89, though again 89 had a lower budget. While the DC animated universe kicked off with Batman the Animated Series and was very serious. By the time it ended, there was some goofiness, but it was present to temper serious discussions about power. When the Batman cartoon series, unrelated to the DCAU, debuted in 2004 on Kids WB, their first villain was an incredibly bouncy Joker played by Kevin Michael Richardson, whose makeup was permanent. Their Penguin, voiced by Tom Kenny, was pretending to have more class than he had, and their serious TV movie in 2005 was Batman fighting Dracula. I love the movie, it's got a great tone, but a key scene is Bruce stealing lipstick from a party guest to write Alucard on a silver platter and holding up to a mirror to show it says Dracula. And a vampire Joker quotes Brokeback Mountain to get Batman to feed him blood. DCAU's discussion of fascism when it comes to superheroes and authority, it is not. The camp and silliness finally make a stronger return with the Deadpool movies starting in 2016, and adjusted, making over $1.02 billion, or 5.3 Saharas, like Guardians. The movies are very, very R, and apparently do discuss some serious subjects, but it took 3 movies for Wolverine, still played for Hugh Jackman, to finally wear his yellow comic book accurate costume after 24 years and 10 films. Admittedly, he wasn't in the other 2 Deadpool movies, but it took... Nope, we don't have time to discuss the Disney-Fox merger. Modern comic book adaptations don't say it, but the Burton and Schumacher movies leave a long shadow. They were highly influential to tone and aesthetics, and the fear or embrace of their vibes as time has gone on continues to influence the movies today. No, we don't get the MCU without either of them. We also don't get Batman the Animated Series, Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy, or even the Spider-Man movies, who are still mostly based their villains in science and reality, but also gave a bright red costume to Spidey and the campy horror scene of Doc Ock's tentacles gaining sentience in a hospital. None of these movies are perfect, but they all build off each other, and that is how art is always supposed to work. Thank you for listening to Circuit Court Entertainment. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. We are on all major podcast platforms. Please follow our social media too. We are on Blue Sky at CCE Pod and Tumblr at Circuit Court Entertainment. We also have a Reddit, r/CCE Pod. This episode was written, edited, and recorded by me, Mina. The script was edited by CJ Peterson. Podcast art by Empress Cirque on Blue Sky. Thank you for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon.